My name is Carrie Taylor, and I am director of Lippitt House Museum. And I wanted to thank you all for joining tonight's program, where we are going to be featuring voices of young people in a conversation about the importance of civic education to the health of our democracy, and put it in a larger context about the state of civic health here in Rhode Island. Tonight's program is a partnership between the Providence League of Women Voters and Lippitt House Museum. Programming which promotes civic engagement is central to Lippitt House Museum's mission, and this is really inspired by the Lippitt family's commitment to public service. So we're very happy to offer programming such as this. This is the 7th year that we, Lippitt House Museum, has partnered with the League on a community conversation series. We want to make sure to thank the financial support offered by the League of Women Voters of Rhode Island's Education Fund that helps support this program. Now, tonight's program is recorded, and we're going to post it later on our YouTube channel. So we're going to ask that everyone keep their microphones muted and your cameras off. That will be better for the recording, so other people can enjoy this program who weren't able to join us this evening. To also make your viewing experience a little bit more enjoyable, we recommend that you put your viewing into speaker mode. That way you'll always be able to see the speakers highlighted on your screen, because we're going to have them spotlighted, so they'll be pinned up at the top of your monitors. For people who would like to know more about the speakers and a little bit about their background, the speakers' bios are posted on the calendar registration page of our website, and we'll also put a link to the bios in the chat feature, so that way we can spend more time in conversation and not doing introductions in tonight's 1-hour program. We are reserving time in this program for conversations from you, the audience members. And so if you do have a question, we ask that you submit it during the chat, using the chat feature, and I will submit those to our speakers this evening. So now I want to turn things over to our moderator for this evening, and that's Martha Frucci with the League of Women Voters.
Good evening. Thank you very much, Carrie. I'm Martha Frucci from the League of Women Voters, and it's a pleasure to host this event. Recent events have led many people to question the strength of our democracy and wonder how widespread is civic literacy. Informed and engaged participants are the core of any democratic system, and tonight we want to explore aspects of the current problems. Often discussions are limited to school-based settings, but Carrie Taylor, who you just met, has tried to give our discussion a much broader base to include the immigrant experience, young activists, and the civic health of the state. The good news is there is a growing interest in the topic in Rhode Island. The Civic Literacy Act, passed by the state legislature last year, requires civic education for middle and high school students. And the Rhode Island Civics Coalition was formed to advance an agenda of civic literacy and participation. This week, March 7th through 11th, they are sponsoring the inaugural Civic Learning Week, which will provide information to all in a variety of formats. We hope this program will contribute to that effort. To get us started, I'd like to give each of the panelists a chance to introduce themselves. Let's go to Marco first. Is Marco here? There he is.
Hello. Good evening, you all. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Marcos Bonilla, and I am originally from the Dominican Republic. I moved here in 2014, pursuing my English learning language, but now I work for an adult education agency called the Genesis Center School. I continue my education at the CCRI, and I also serve the National Guard. So hopefully we get to talk to you guys all tonight.
Thank you. Julia, you want to go next?
Sure. Thank you, Martha. And I'm delighted to be here with Lippitt House and the League of Women Voters and everyone else. I'm Julia Renaud. I'm the Associate Director of Grants and Strategic Initiatives at Rhode Island Council for the Humanities. And the council is the independent state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities in Rhode Island. So, you know, some of the founding words of the NEH were that democracy demands wisdom and vision in its citizens. And we at the Rhode Island Council for the Humanities take that very seriously as part of our work in really strengthening that wisdom and vision and our democracy. So looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Ooh, thank you very much. How about Athena talking next?
Hello, everyone. My name is Athena Holloway. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am a junior at Classical High School. I'm very invested in my community. I'm one of the founders of our Racial Equity Committee at school. I'm very involved in student government, and I am the captain of the Japanese club at my school. So I'm kind of all over the place, but I really love interacting with everyone in my community. Thank you for having me.
Okay, and then Justin.
Hello, my name is Justin. I am a sophomore at East Providence High School. I enjoy advocating for civics education and human rights. I'm leading efforts to create a Black student union and debate club in order to promote equity and civic engagement in my high school. And I'm really glad to be here, so thank you for having me.
Well, thank you all. And my background is a retired social studies teacher and adult trainer, but I've been active in the League of Women Voters for about 50 years in civic education of various sorts. Well, I want to launch this discussion with a question that I hope everybody will pitch in on. What are the powerful places you think civic learning has taken place in your own life? All right, would anybody like to jump in first, or should we just go around robin?
Definitely. I can start by saying, since I moved here to the United States and to be able to become an active member of society, I first had to learn about the structure of the society of this nation, the structure of government, and I learned about civics education at the school that I work for currently. I came in as an ESOL student, that's English for learners of other languages. And that's how I initially learned about civic education here, and it was empowering because I was able to learn about information and the power of information to become an active member of society.
All right, Athena, would you like to go next?
Yes, so at my school, we are not offered a civics course. So I kind of had to go out of my way to find and learn more about my community. So I did that during the summer of 9th grade, actually. That's when I got involved with many youth organizations. And from there, I joined Providence Student Union. It's right across from my school, so it was very convenient to go to. And I went to a lot of workshops that taught me about civic literacy and how I can actually engage in my community. And that's from there I got exposure to RICLC, the Rhode Island Civics Learning Coalition. And from there, that's why I was able to further everything that I've been doing so far. And kind of it drove my passion to wanting to teach my peers why it's so important to have a civics education. And from there, I was able to go into the working recommendation group that's going to provide RIDE with some feedback on how they should make a culturally responsive civics curriculum. So that's something that I really take pride in, and I hope that it can reflect how my peers have experienced their life so far in terms of history, and I hope they're represented in whatever curriculum RIDE puts out.
How about Justin talking about his experience?
So I have actually had a more formal experience with civics education through a course that my school offered, U.S. Government and Politics. Through that course, I got to connect with a majority of my community and talk about a lot of issues in society. and I learned a lot from that class. That kind of sparked my passion for civics education. And through there, I actually became a board member at the Center for Leadership and Educational Equity, which also focuses on promoting equity within classrooms. We have a lot of work in Rhode Island. And through the Center for Leadership and Educational Equity, I too actually got the opportunity to be on the youth committee for the Rhode Island Civic Learner Coalition. I also work with Athena, and our work on there has been great.
Well, thank you. And Julia, how about you?
Sure. Well, like everyone else, I think I've had really powerful experiences with civic learning, both inside the classroom and outside of it. So, I'll speak to some of the really transformative experiences I have had through, programs and exhibitions at cultural institutions as like one of the places that civic learning also takes place. So, for example, visiting the National Museum of African American History and Culture and really learning so much more about the struggle for African American suffrage and civil rights, or, thinking about a program that the council was fortunate enough to fund that was run by the Refugee Dream Center about different ways that refugees and asylees in Rhode Island are able to participate and have participated civically, and really being in conversation with community members I may not have ever interacted with before otherwise. So, I think those opportunities are really around us at all times, and it's fantastic to encounter them in ways that are both more formal and more informal.
Well, thank you. I know that both Athena and Justin are very active. I'm quite impressed by your resume of activities here. But do you think that a lack of formal civics education is an impairment and a barrier to civic involvement in the larger community? And Marcos, I don't know about your experience. I mean, you've got work and information at the Genesis Center, but do you think generally immigrants are kind of not empowered to do anything in a civic sense? So jump in if you have a response. Oops.
Yes, I can jump in for that one. While I do think it's always important for youth to advocate for what they want, so like kind of going out of your way to find resources, I do think that it is a hindrance that we aren't allowed, or some youth aren't allowed to have civics education in school, just because it can be very hard to get started. When you're getting into activism, I know I started getting into it during quarantine. So I was kind of at home all day and I didn't have anything else to do but watch the news. And that kind of pushed me to really get involved in my community, just like a lot of my peers. And from there, we were able to learn. But I can't imagine like going to school, maybe taking a bunch of AP classes and not really having time. It's kind of hard to get involved in extracurriculars as well. So if civics was a actual core subject, a course to take, then everyone would have the access to it and everyone would know their rights. But the fact that you kind of have to go out of your way to get it is really sad, to be honest.
Justin, do you think if you hadn't had those courses that kind of triggered your interest, that you would be active civically?
Honestly, I don't think I would. Before the course, I had no prior introduction to civics education. I really did not know a lot about the government and my rights as an individual and as a human being. And that course introduced me to all those things and allowed me to have a formal introduction to civics education, which, because of that course, I feel like I've had way more resources at my disposal, from my teacher to my peers at school. That course actually helped to connect me with some other organizations like the Center for Leadership and Educational Equity. And so because of that formal education, I do think that I am very much engaged in civics education. But without that, I don't know if I would be.
Marcos, would you like to make a contribution here?
Of course, it's amazing how I learned about the point of view of these two high schoolers because I did not got the chance to go to high school in this country, right? When I came here, I did feel as an immigrant, I feel somehow excluded from the information. I know there's so many programs available for immigrants to participate and collaborate to the community, but then all these programs are not being talked enough, are not being promoted enough. I got the opportunity to go to one of those family communities reunions, and I was offered. Well, I was representing the Genesis Center, the company that I work for, and most of the people at that community, they were not engaged. They didn't know about all these programs that have been running there for years. And that's how usually those programs go away from the communities, and the funding for those programs go away because of the lack of information. And yes, it's definitely sad, as the guys were talking here, Athena and Justin, because it's not talked enough. And my experience from that point of view about as I said, power of information. As soon as we are we feel included. That's how I felt when I came to the school, to the Genesis Center, as an adult or young adult. I think the power of information is important in every stage of age of a person, and it should be present. Civic education should be present, not just in high school. It should be offered to adults or young adults as well.
Good. Julia, what statewide is anything being done along the lines that Marcos suggested? Are there programs for adults, immigrants, whatever?
Definitely.
Okay.
Yes, definitely. I mean, I think organizations like the one Marcos works with, Dorcas International does amazing work. So does Refugee Dream Centers. I know I mentioned them, and other organizations, I think definitely. But, I think it's also important to think about our education around what civic health and civic life really mean and what they really look like, because I think it's all of us have a kind of straightforward understanding of it as electoral participation and, in registering and voting. And that's certainly extremely important and an integral part, but it's not all of what, constitutes civic health and civic life. At the council, we've been recently thinking about it, civic health in terms of community participation and community well-being. And obviously so many factors, influence that. And, to us, civic health and kind of a civic contribution can be as straightforward and kind of as personal as spending time with family and friends, volunteering in your community, donating to an organization that you feel strongly about. And those kind of indicators are actually backed up in civic health literature. So, and they're measured as ways to look at civic health. So I just wanted to put that out there, that there are obviously people of different ages and different immigration statuses and in different life situations have various degrees of access to voting and kind of those more formal kinds of participation. But so many things we do in our communities really are important for civic health.
Part of the Civic Literacy Act, which is going to be implemented soon, I hope, includes that students should have the opportunity to complete a student-led civics program. How important do you think that would be in developing a sort of pattern of participation? Justin, did you have anything like that in your class?
Yes, actually. We did actually a few projects and we collaborated with peers on them. One was evaluating the Supreme Court. And so hands-on activities like that, especially when students get to pick what their projects are on, really helps. It's because if I'm picking a project, I'm obviously interested in the subject, and that'll allow me to kind of be more engaged and more involved and more hands-on, because through discussions, I know for me personally, I have learned the most through having conversations with others. It wasn't from textbooks, it wasn't from YouTube or Google. it was from having conversations with other people and with other people who are very different from myself. I have a diverse group of people. And so through those conversations, through being exposed to that, through doing projects and collaborating, I've learned a lot about civics, and that really, it gets me engaged in civics.
Marcos, do you think that, I'm sure that at the Genesis Center with an immigrant group that they're addressing there, they spend some time obviously on the institutions of democracy in the United States. But do you think that projects such as Justin described are useful in that context too?
Indeed, we offer one of the programs that we offer is the citizenship preparation class at the school, and we go through all the civics 100 civic questions of the interview for USCIS, the immigration department, and we have interviews. We go back and forth with the students, and we teach them about our leaders, about the organization of our government and the structure of our government. And it's very important as the topic and the title of today's discussion, the crisis of democracy, because when we think about civic education, I personally think about democracy, I think about information, I think about rights, and I think about responsibilities of me as a citizen, and how my behavior will affect the rest of the people living around me. And that's just, as Justin was saying, learning about just acting, the courts and the leaders, the politics that are representing us, and how do we choose them, how do we vote for them. We learning about civic education also gave us the empowering to also vote out those leaders that are not representing us well, based on our story and our goal as a society.
Okay. Athena, I know you don't have a formal course at your high school, but if you had one, what would you like, that kind of project-based format?
Yes, I would love it. I go to classical, which is a very college-bound school, so they stress a lot of courses like physics and like AP classes, history and English. And while those are important, I think having civics courses are just as important, because once you go out into the real world, you're always going to have to know about the democracy and how to vote and the processes, and teach that to, if you have children or even your partners who may not know. But not everyone's going to go into a field of science, and not everyone's going to go into a field of history. So why shouldn't civics be a required course? And I think that a lot of students are realizing that at my school. This is why we have things such as student government. It really wasn't as rampant in 9th grade, but I think because of quarantine, a lot of youth have started figuring themselves out and finding their true identity. And so coming back into school, we've all found what we want to advocate for. And student government is kind of the closest thing to like actually doing things that we want to do and having students lead the events that are going to happen at school. So classical is a very like academic based school, so we don't have many fun events. We might have a movie day, but no one goes to that. So the junior student government, we decided to hold a fashion show which showcases creativity in students, but we're also trying to show them that they can reach out and make connections if they really try and advocate for themselves. A lot of students have reached out to RISD because it's so close and Brown, and they've gotten responses, and we're really getting a lot of people to help and sponsor our event. And that wouldn't have happened if the students didn't feel like they could step up and ask the question and send that email. And that's something that we're trying to push for everyone to do. Even in the racial equity committee, we encourage students to go and look at acts that are going to be passed or bills and bring it to us so we can discuss it. We talk about what safety looks like in schools, and we talk about voting drives and everything. And even though we can only do it every Thursday for about 40 minutes, at least like even doing that, we've gotten so much participation, and it's just so great to see people really engaged in those things that I think if it was a course at school, it would be awesome. It would be great.
Julia, any comments?
Yeah, I mean, just that, you know, lifting up the work Athena is doing and all of your classmates at Classical, that's fantastic that you are organizing on your own and really getting that community momentum. And that's what civic life looks like, right? You know, to kind of also just touch back on what Justin was saying about dialogue really being one of the most important and informative parts of this kind of learning. I mean, we at the council have definitely observed that, you know, first as kind of grant makers of cultural programs, which often involve dialogue. And then we did a project called Culture is Key that really looked at how cultural organizations strengthen civic health in Rhode Island. And one of the, you know, like 10 or so ways we identified is through doing just what Justin was saying, which was having, you know, facilitating informed and inclusive dialogues and really hosting communal experiences, you know, and kind of similar to what Athena is doing as well. So yeah, I think that the more that we can have these kind of interactions and informed dialogues among different members of our community, the more everyone will learn and the stronger we'll be.
Well, Athena, I was thrilled to hear that all the virtual learning that went on wasn't a total loss, okay? Because we kept hearing so many bad things about it. Nice to know that it had some positive flow too. I know one of Athena's issues or concerns was that there's sometimes a disconnect between younger activists and older, more established activists. So what, Athena, do you want maybe members of our audience to know about younger activists and how they need to relate, these two groups need to relate to each other?
Yeah, so that's a very good, also loaded question. So I would start with, for one, just be open-minded, because one, even though we will have a lot of similarities, we will also sometimes have a lot of differences because we're coming from different perspectives and different parts of our life, different walks of life. One example I can give, again, I'm sorry, but the Racial Equity Committee, we do a lot of things there, and it's intergenerational. So a lot of the times, admin, so like principal, the vice principal, will come and listen to our meetings, and sometimes we'll have conversations about things that we do not agree on, and sometimes they are radically opposite views, and that can be really hard to tackle sometimes. But I think those are the most important conversations to have uncomfortable conversations. Really allows people to understand each other more, especially if you can have them respectfully and civilly and come to a area where you can both agree with each other and agree that you have different opinions, but can still move forward and make next steps and action plans. I think that's the beautiful thing about doing intersectional, intergenerational work, because there's always going to be things that you hadn't thought about before. But once you look at it in the big picture in retrospect, you're really addressing everything if you can actually have a civil conversation with someone who has different views from you. So I would say, just please be open-minded and know that we are really trying to prioritize and make sure that our peers aren't going to feel unsafe in any space that they go to, and making sure that they can express themselves to their identity, however that may be, whether that may be the clothes they wear or the makeup they wear or they have, or how they feel about their race. They should feel comfortable to say it in a respectful way.
Okay. Anybody else want to chime in on that?
Yes, I just want to highlight Athena's comment about youth proving our learning process and our desires as well towards providing to our community and participating. Going back in my experience when I was in high school, back in the Dominican Republic, I was part of the United Nations programs. That's an international program. I'm not sure if you guys know about it, but they teach us how to be delegates. They teach us how to represent a country at the General Assembly of United Nations. And I made it through regionals, I made it to nationals, and I came to represent the Dominican Republic in Manhattan in 2012. That was a big highlight for my younger years in learning about structure, in learning about identity, learning about climate change, learning about the problems of, in the community of the world, not just each community or country individually. How can we all come and make a change? It was very impactful for me as a young boy as well. Just like all these programs are also affecting the panelists here today.
Good. Justin, do you have any comments, or are you all set?
Yeah, that's actually amazing. That I've heard of opportunities like Model UN before, and it's things like that leads engaging activities that allow people in general, no matter your age group, to interact with people of diverse backgrounds, who may not think the same way that you do. Athena actually touched on this a little before. Me personally, I've learned the most from those conversations. And it's not that I've learned the most, like I've changed my opinions, but I've learned the most in terms of being able to live in a world where there are so many different identities, so many different people with diverse backgrounds that come from diverse places. Through those conversations, through debates, which very much ties into civics, I've learned so much from that. And activities like Model UN promotes those conversations. And so that's actually an amazing opportunity. And I think
just to push back on that.
What was that?
There used to be, a model legislature. There were other programs, but I think it was before the pandemic, and many of them might have been canceled as a result of that. And not all schools ever participated in those programs as well. But they were wonderful when they, were up and running. I think kids learned a lot. And just the sharing, Justin, as you said, talking to people that are not from your high school or your group makes a huge difference. Julia, did you have a comment or not?
Just that, I think everyone has made beautiful points that I completely support. And, just echoing that this is also a lifelong process, and folks are engaging with this for, as Athena said, like intergenerational conversations are so incredibly important, as well as just like continued lifelong engagement in all of the ways that we've talked about. So, yeah.
Julia, I know that the Council for the Humanities has done some work about just in general the civic health throughout Rhode Island. If you had to kind of sum it up, what would you give it as a sort of a grade or whatever you want to call it?
Sure. So we're actually in the process of coming up with that assessment, which is really exciting. So the council right now is developing the first ever civic health index for Rhode Island. And that will be a data-driven report that's really assessing where we are in terms of civic health. And that's never been done before. So we're partnering with the National Conference on Citizenship, which is a congressionally commissioned organization that does this work. They've worked with over 30 other states. We're also working with the Rhode Island Department of State, and we're also working with a number of paid community partners to really make sure that the story we're telling really reflects the reality on the ground across Rhode Island. So really excited about that work. And, that came out of, I mentioned before, we had a recently released a report called Culture is Key that was really looking at the relationship between cultural organizations' work and our civic health. And we realized that this baseline didn't exist. So, you know, we're really looking forward to, hopefully in a few more months, I'll have that clear answer for you, Martha, but we're excited. Yeah.
Like metrics that are kind of common in these assessments.
Yes.
Is civic education in schools one of the metrics?
So the National Conference on Citizenship has created 5 areas of indicators, and they are, I have them here, they're volunteering and giving, interactions with family, friends, and neighbors, political involvement, group memberships, and voting and registration. And then we'll be adding all of our whatever other data we want to add to that. So we could certainly include information on civics education as well. But for that particular, you know, metric, that's not what's included right now. But I also am aware that there are other studies going on right now in Rhode Island to assess the state of civic education, including one that Rhode Island Civic Learning Coalition is leading in Generation Citizen. So that's exciting. And I think we're going to have a lot more insight soon.
Well, Martha, I think we've got some questions from our audience here. So I think we can open it up to some of our panelists, but I think this first question actually relates maybe Justin and Athena could answer. And the question is, did your courses in American history introduce you at all to the evolution of the country's democracy? And was that course useful?
Athena, you want to take a stab at it?
Sure. So I'm taking AP US history right now. And we are currently on unit 8 out of 10. So we're pretty much more than halfway through. And the thing is with AP courses, it may be different for regular history courses, but it's just a formula to get a 5 on the exam in May. So unfortunately, a lot of the content that we learn in class is just to memorize and not to retain. You memorize a chapter, you take a test on it, you keep it in the back of your head, and you keep doing it until you have the AP exam in May, and hopefully you get a 5. And then maybe when you go to college, if you want to go deeper into that, then you'll take more immersive courses. But unfortunately, at the high school level, a lot of the classes push more just getting a good grade on a test rather than actually learning the content, which is why I think that a project-based course would be more effective, because then students aren't really forced to just not really engage in their work. It's very easy to take classes and just memorize it in your head instead of actually knowing what it means. If you go up to an average student at classical, you can ask them any question and they'll probably know the right answer. But if you ask them to elaborate on it, I doubt they'll know what they actually mean by it. So I think that US history, in retrospect, it is a good course in theory, but how it's taught is another issue. It should be taught.
Well, I agree. This is sort of a separate issue from civics education, but it sounds like classical could use a good civics course. Justin, that was not your experience. What about your American history curriculum? Was it helpful in shaping civic literacy?
So yes, I actually took AP US Government and Politics, and although there was some focus, because it is an AP class, so there was some focus on taking tests and not long-term learning, but mostly just memorization for the exam in May. There was some of that, but through the engaging hands-on projects that we had, we learned a lot. And that has gave me the tools and resources to advocate and fight for human rights. And it it made me realize that my voice is very powerful and that I am allowed to have one even though I am young. And so it really did help. And courses like that, for me personally, I think will stick with me for the rest of my life.
Julia, Marcos, do you have any comments?
Yes, I'd like to touch on that as well. Since I am almost graduating for my associate degree in the CCRI, I did have to go through required history classes. I learned so much about the United States history, and it's sad because most of our history is just generational ideology. Some of them, just to mention some, discrimination, racism, and those things are taught, and just like civic education is. And if we focus more in teaching our people that voice Justin was talking about, and that hands-on education that Athena was talking about, we could really break through those generational, I would say, courses. I believe those are domestications of humanity and history in the United States. It's very tough. It's very tough. We break through slavery. We have you as an example from the League of Women's Voters, and that was a very tough era of our nation as well in history. And having a voice, claiming those rights through civic education, got the women to vote. And that's an amazing example of the power of civic education as well.
Thanks.
Julia, is there an example of, or I'm sure there is, but is there, can you maybe call out some examples of different organizations, institutions in Rhode Island or maybe in other places that are doing good examples of civic learning initiatives and programs that maybe could be either expanded in Rhode Island or could be models for Rhode Island institutions?
Definitely. Well, I think this is one, Lippitt House Museum.
That is the right answer. Thank
you. Lippitt House Museum obviously has had a sustained commitment over time to civic engagement, as you said at the beginning of the program, and partnering with the League of Women Voters, and I think that work is happening across Rhode Island. For our Culture is Key report, for the project, we specifically worked with 5 cultural organizations and asked them to, really kind of amplify the elements of civic engagement in their programs. And, a lot of what they found was that what they're already doing really does positively impact civic health. They just weren't necessarily thinking of it that way, so kind of having the discussion-based programs that we've been talking about around different issues of culture and identity and history. One example that comes to mind is the Wilbury Theater Group in Providence partnered with Ana Gonzalez, who's was at Rhode Island Public Radio doing the Mosaic podcast, but they did a community storytelling event around experiences in the pandemic that was really, I think extremely moving for participants as well as everyone hearing the stories. But just the idea that sharing your story in your community is an act of civic engagement, being really powerful. And I think cultural organizations are, one of the primary places that happens. And also definitely just they're a really powerful site for learning. That Rhode Islanders are visiting historical house museums, say, and we encountered a really moving story about a family visiting a historical house museum the day after the 2016 election, and in conversation with the person who worked there, really learning more about the first presidential election of the United States, which was extremely complicated, and that experience being so powerful for that family that visited, that the next day the parent called that institution and said, you know what, we're only going to be living in Rhode Island a few more months. Our family's moving. I've decided to homeschool my child through taking them to cultural institutions like yours. So a really powerful testament to the power of that kind of learning. And it really is going on all over the state.
Someone's asked a question about the importance of having activities like student government. I was an attendee at a program on Monday night as part of Rhode Island Civic Learning Week that Athena actually organized along with some of her colleagues with the Rhode Island Civic Learning Coalition. And I thought I learned at that program that it is, am I correct, Athena, that it is not common that high schools have student government or student councils now? Maybe you could maybe share, maybe both you and Justin could maybe share about the role of student government, or maybe the lack thereof in contemporary high schools now.
Yes, Justin, do you want to go first? Because I feel like I keep taking every question and going first.
Sure, Athena, thank you. Student government, student councils are very important because they increase the student's voice and ability to be connected to the principal and administrators and the people who have the power to make a change. And so they are very important in that sense. And it increases civic engagement and increases those discussions that I was talking about earlier. When a student government is supported by a principal or administration, that is also very important, obviously. And so, yeah.
Yes, I definitely agree. I think in terms of my school, student government is the one place where students can have a voice. And while that sounds kind of bad to say, at least we do have a place to make our voice heard. So I think student government is very important, actually. And it also shows students how to advocate for themselves, because just because there's student government at school doesn't mean that it's going to be all sunshine and rainbows now. You're still going to have to draft up agendas and go to the principal's office and try and let them have you make this event, because they might push back against it. And that's exactly what we've faced at school, but we've been able to get through it by having student support. There was one time where, so midterms were going on and every other high school was not having midterms, but Classical wanted to give us midterms, but they wanted to make it 2-hour traditional midterms. But a lot of students were not ready for that because we had just come back from a virtual year. And in some core subjects like languages, it was very hard for students to keep learning during COVID. I'm a Japanese tutor at Classical, and I've had numerous students who they were stellar students in their first year of high school, but because of COVID, they just dropped because they had to take care of their siblings, they had to help with their family. It was just extenuating circumstances that they couldn't control that caused them to basically not be able to further their language learning. And so I was able to see that, and I just thought that maybe it's not that we shouldn't have midterms. I understand teachers want to test students all the time, but it doesn't have to be in the form of a 2-hour standardized test. You can make it project-based. You can find another way to find out how much information students have retained. And so all the governments got together and did a survey, student-wide survey for the whole school about how they felt about midterms. And we got a really, really high response rate, around 500 responses, and 98.2% said that they would prefer a project for midterms. And we also reached out to many stakeholders. My government, for example, we went on call with someone named Tyrell. He's actually on the Board of Education. And I also brought it up with the superintendent because I'm on his student council board. And even though my school wasn't able to take midterms away or turn them into project-based, it did really open an eye to many teachers and admin that students can organize and push back against things that they don't think is right, and we can get backing for it too. So I'm hoping that anytime they institute something that is not for the students, we're always going to push back on it, and that was just one example. I think it's very important.
Athena, you are a model of civic participation.
Thank you.
Well, Martha, I think we have time for one final question for our participants this evening.
Okay. I think we want to sort of end on a upbeat note of where we should go in the future. So what actions do you think that audience members can take to make a difference related to civic learning or the health of democracy in their community? Maybe some specifics. Let's start with Julia.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think often the kind of state of our democracy and political polarization can be extremely overwhelming and can feel way too big for any individual to impact. And, you know, I just want to say that, you know, as I mentioned earlier, the metrics that are used by the National Conference on Citizenship and kind of other folks to measure civic health really do have to do with individual behavior and in a really kind of personal daily way. And so things like spending time with your family and friends, sitting down with your family for dinner, participating in any kind of community group, like going to your church or your mosque or your synagogue or going to your book club. All of those really make a difference and positively impact our civic health. You know, reaching out to your neighbors, bringing soup to a friend who's sick, all of these things, I think, you know, I would love everyone to recognize them in their own life and recognize that they really do strengthen our sense of community and our civic health and our democracy. So it's not as overwhelming as you might think.
Thank you. That gives us a lot of, I think, suggestions of tiny ways that mount up to big ways. Justin, do you have some specific suggestions?
Yes, I think one of the biggest things is to have an open mind. Have an open mind, realize that not everybody's going to think the same way that you think. Realize that everybody comes from very diverse backgrounds, with very, diverse experiences. And so just being aware of that, I think, is very important. Understanding each other's differences, understanding where someone may be coming from, and really just living life trying to promote peace. I think those are some of the most important things. And like I said, having an open mind. And I think with that, the world would be a better place.
Okay, thank you. That's excellent. How about Athena?
I really resonate with what Justin said. I definitely think everything that I've been doing up until now has influenced me as a person and what career path I want to take. I strive to be an international lawyer that will bring peace between nations. And I think that's something that starts with communication first. So I really, really love what Justin said. And I think just everyone, please be mindful of what you can do for the people around you. So if you're a parent or a teacher or a student, always think of ways you can help others. If someone's trying to, I don't know, testify, learn how to write to testify for a bill or an act, maybe provide some support or some resources. And even if you don't think it's a lot, it really does help people out who are trying to go through life advocating for what they feel is right. Any support makes a difference. So thank you so much.
Okay, Marcus, you can want to wrap it up.
Definitely. I will go more about making a statement. I believe as citizens, we do not like to be controlled. We like to know how to stand up for ourselves, stand up for our rights. We want to know how to protest, and as we have been doing very active, and as we belong to a very active society, I believe that civic education will help us get there and will help us keep growing on that matter, because civic education is focused in personal and common development, and for us to get to that family, community, healthy way of living, as all of my panelists here, they all have said amazing things, and I believe that just hearing our neighbors, just participating, and also being more welcoming to people from other nations and people from other backgrounds, from other languages. I moved here 8 years ago, and I never thought, just by giving myself the opportunity and not listening to hateful comments or bad comments, I would be serving the armed forces of this nation. And it's amazing how other people that opened the doors to me through inclusion got me to where I am today. So it's an amazing impact that we can make to our community.
Well, I think we've all learned a lot tonight, shared a lot. And honestly, if civic education takes off, hopefully it will produce some more Justins, Athenas, and Marcuses, which would make for a very healthy democracy. So thank you for letting me participate.
Thank you.
Well, I want to echo Martha's words on that. Thank you all for participating, and also for our audience members this evening. We have another program that is next Wednesday, same time. It's on a different topic, but related: democracy in crisis, the importance of media literacy and combating fake news. So if you haven't already registered, please do. The speakers are Ed Fitzpatrick, Boston Globe staff writer, Renaud Hobbs, founder of the URI Media Education Lab, and Lynette Lambringer, cooperating attorney with the ACLU of Rhode Island. So it's going to be another great program that will make the second in our series. So thanks again for everyone for joining us. We are going to be sending out a very short, and I mean that, a very short survey later this week, and we ask that you help us by completing that survey so we can continue to evolve and improve this survey. So thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your evening and be well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.